The thing about being underestimated your entire life is that you learn to stay quiet. You learn to observe. You learn that sometimes the most powerful move you can ever make is simply sitting back and watching arrogant people reveal exactly who they are. "I forged your name for the trust," my younger sister Blair bragged, swirling her expensive red wine in her crystal glass. "What can you do about it?" She smiled, a predatory, mocking smile that made the blood in my veins run ice cold. Before I could even process the sheer audacity of her words, my own mother laughed from the head of the dining table. "Oh, let it go, Sloane. She cannot even afford a lawyer on that sad little government salary of hers." Those words hit me like a physical blow to the chest. The betrayal was so deep, so casually delivered between bites of roasted asparagus, that it literally took my breath away. My own family, the people who were supposed to protect me, were sitting around a lavish dining room table laughing about stealing my financial future. $250,000. Gone. Wiped out by the golden child, while my parents cheered her on and poured her another glass of wine. The sheer, blinding rage that bubbled up inside my stomach was unlike anything I had ever felt. I wanted to scream until my throat bled. I wanted to stand up, flip the heavy oak table, and shatter every piece of fine china my mother owned. But I did not move a muscle. Because what Blair and my parents did not know was that I was not just some low-level government clerk pushing papers and fetching coffee. I quietly reached into my jacket pocket, my fingers brushing against the cold, hard metal of my federal badge. I pulled out my phone under the table, keeping my face entirely blank, and typed a single message to my tactical team. Initiate fraud investigation. How did a quiet Sunday family dinner turn into a chaotic federal crime scene? Well, to understand the explosion, you have to understand the powder keg that had been building pressure for 31 years. An hour earlier, I sat in my beat-up Honda Accord outside my parents' massive, sprawling estate in Evanston, Illinois. The car heater rattled violently, struggling and failing against the bitter cold of the November evening. I took a deep, shaky breath, watching the warm yellow light spilling from the massive bay windows of the house. I am Sloane. I am 31 years old, and for as long as I can remember, I have been the invisible child in this family. The scapegoat. The family disappointment. While my sister Blair, who is 2 years younger than me, climbed the corporate ladder at a boutique marketing firm in Chicago, landing promotions and constantly posting about her glamorous executive lifestyle on social media, I supposedly struggled through various entry-level government jobs that my family barely understood and certainly did not respect. Still pushing papers at that boring office, my dad, Vaughn, would ask at every single holiday gathering, barely hiding his deep disappointment as he looked at my plain clothes. "Sloane works for some federal agency," my mom, Blythe, would explain to our wealthy relatives with an apologetic shrug and a forced smile. "Something with banking regulations, I think. We do not really understand it, but it pays her rent." Blair never missed an opportunity to remind everyone of the massive gap between us. "I just closed a multi-million-dollar branding deal," she would announce at Sunday dinners, tossing her perfectly styled blonde hair and flashing her designer jewelry. Meanwhile, Sloane is probably filing paperwork for her tiny government salary and eating instant noodles. The entire family would laugh. I would force a smile, stare at my plate, and quietly change the subject. What they did not know, what I could not tell them due to the incredibly sensitive nature of my work, was that I was a senior special agent with the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, a highly specialized division of the United States Treasury Department. My boring government job involved investigating massive, complex financial fraud, dismantling international money laundering operations, and hunting down identity theft rings that moved hundreds of millions of dollars across borders. My security clearance was higher than most people even knew existed. My undercover cases had taken down vicious criminal organizations. My sworn testimony in federal court had sent dozens of arrogant fraudsters to maximum security federal prison. But I drove a modest, rusty car. I lived in a small, quiet apartment. I wore plain gray suits from the clearance rack at the local mall. The work I did required absolute discretion. High-profile wealth attracted attention, and attention ruined investigations. We were taught to blend in, to be forgettable. So, I let my family think I was just boring, unsuccessful Sloane, who could never compete with the brilliant, gorgeous, and wealthy Blair. It had been painful, but manageable, until tonight. I turned off the engine of my Honda, the sudden silence in the cabin feeling heavy and oppressive. I looked at the massive house again, tracing the outline of the expensive landscaping with my eyes. My family toxic dynamic was a well-oiled machine, and I was the rusted gear they loved to grind down every chance they got. But Blair did not know that behind my cheap blazer was a direct line to the highest levels of federal law enforcement. She did not know I had unrestricted access to a financial surveillance system that tracked every single dollar moving through the national banking grid. And she was about to walk right into a steel trap she built with her own two hands. I grabbed my cheap faux leather purse, took one last deep breath of the freezing suburban air, and stepped out of the car. The wind bit at my face, but I barely felt it. My mind was racing, calculating variables, preparing for the emotional warfare that awaited me inside. How far was my sister willing to go to maintain her fake empire of wealth and status? And more importantly, what would happen when I finally stopped taking the abuse and snapped back? Would I walk out of that house tonight with a family, or would I burn the entire toxic structure to the ground? Walking up the long, winding cobblestone driveway to my parents' house always felt like walking into a carefully curated museum dedicated entirely to my own failures. Every expensive brick, every perfectly manicured shrub, every glowing garden light seemed to whisper that I simply did not belong in their world. I paused on the grand front porch, the cold wind biting through my thin winter coat, and let the painful memories wash over me. I needed to remember why I was doing this. I needed to let the sting of the past fuel me, to keep my professional resolve from crumbling under the weight of false family loyalty. The first exhibit in my personal museum of pain was dated exactly 13 years ago. I was 18 years old, sitting at our massive granite kitchen table with acceptance letters to 3 very decent state universities spread out in front of me. I was so proud. I just needed a cosigner for a $15,000 student loan to cover the gap in my tuition. Just $15,000. I promised them I would work 3 jobs. I promised I would pay every single cent back before graduation. My father, Vaughn, sat across from me, sipping his expensive scotch, slowly shaking his head with a look of mild annoyance. "It is too much risk, Sloane," he had said, not even bothering to make eye contact with me as he read the financial section of the newspaper. "You are not exactly a high achiever. What if you fail your classes and drop out? We cannot be saddled with that kind of debt. It is a bad investment." My mother, Blythe, had walked over and patted my shoulder condescendingly, her diamond rings cold against my skin. "Maybe a 4-year college is not for you, sweetie. Community college has some lovely secretarial programs. You should aim for something more realistic." I had cried myself to sleep that night, staring at the ceiling of my bedroom, feeling utterly worthless. I ended up working 3 grueling minimum wage jobs. I poured coffee at a diner at 4 in the morning, worked as a night auditor at a cheap motel, and shelved books at the campus bookstore, barely sleeping, just to pay my way through a local state school. I graduated with honors, though they barely noticed. The sick, twisted punchline to that memory? The very next month after denying my $15,000 loan, my parents cheerfully wrote a check for $45,000 to fund Blair Lavish, over-the-top destination wedding. A wedding to a guy she had known for barely 6 months. A marriage that ended in a bitter, messy divorce less than 2 years later. They never asked her to pay them back a single dime. They smiled and called it an investment in her happiness. The second exhibit in my mental museum was much more recent. My 30th birthday party, just last year. I had begged them not to throw a party, but my mother insisted it would look bad to the wealthy relatives and country club friends if they did not celebrate the milestone. We were in the sprawling backyard, standing around the expensive patio heaters. I had just received my promotion to senior special agent that week, a massive, life-changing achievement that I was incredibly proud of, even if I could not share the exact operational details with them. I was reaching into my purse for my phone when I accidentally dropped my wallet and my federal ID badge spilled out onto the stone patio. Blair, wearing a dress that cost more than my monthly rent, had swooped down and picked it up. She dangled it by the lanyard like it was a dirty, contaminated rag. Oh wow, she had laughed loudly, intentionally drawing the attention of our aunt, uncle, and several family friends. Look at this. It looks like a badge for a mall security guard. Do you get to drive a little golf cart around the office parking lot, Sloan? Do you carry a plastic whistle? The surrounding relatives had chuckled, sipping their expensive champagne. I felt my face burn hot with humiliation, reaching out for the badge. It is just an ID for the building, Blair. Hand it back, please. My mother had chimed in then, swirling her mimosa, her tone dripping with fake sweetness. Oh, do not be so sensitive and defensive, Sloan. Blair is just teasing you. You know you just like playing it safe in life. You do not have the aggressive business instinct your sister has. It is fine that you are just a desk clerk. We love you anyway, even if you are not ambitious. That was the exact moment I truly closed off my heart to them. I realized with a sudden, crystal-clear clarity that nothing I ever did would be enough. If I somehow cured a deadly disease, they would ask why I did not patent it and get rich like Blair. If I ran into a burning building and saved a life, they would complain that the smoke ruined my clothes. So, I stopped trying to win their approval. I poured all my energy, all my deep-seated frustration, into my investigative work. I tracked down wealthy criminals who thought they were untouchable. I dismantled massive fraud rings built by arrogant, narcissistic people who thought they were smarter than everyone else. People exactly like Blair. I learned to detach my emotions. I became a relentless machine at work, analyzing financial data, connecting the hidden dots, building airtight cases that no defense lawyer could break. I shook my head, clearing the painful memories away as the freezing wind whipped my hair across my face. I was not that helpless 18-year-old girl begging for a loan anymore, and I was not the humiliated 30-year-old trying to snatch her badge back. I reached out and turned the heavy brass handle of the front door. The scent of roasted rosemary, garlic, and incredibly expensive perfume hit me immediately. The house was warm, loud, and suffocating. I could hear the clinking of glasses and the sound of exaggerated, fake laughter coming from the formal dining room down the hall. I stepped inside the grand foyer, hanging my cheap coat next to a long row of designer jackets and fur trims. I smoothed down my gray slacks, pasted a carefully neutral expression on my face, and walked slowly toward the noise. I was about to face the people who had spent a lifetime making me feel incredibly small. But tonight was going to be different. Tonight, the invisible child was going to cast a very long, very dark shadow over their perfect world. Are you ready for this? The formal dining room was a blinding, overwhelming display of excessive suburban wealth. My mother always went out of her way to use the good china with the gold rims, the heavy crystal wine glasses that caught the light of the chandelier, and the thick silver cutlery that always felt too heavy and cold in my hands. Seated around the massive oak table were my parents, Vaughn and Blythe, looking regal and incredibly smug as they held court. My Uncle Gideon and Aunt Linnea sat across from them. Gideon was a quiet, observant man, a retired commercial architect who actually worked hard for his money and carried a sense of quiet dignity, while Linnea just loved the social status of being attached to our family name. Next to them sat my older cousin Calla, a woman whose entire personality consisted of agreeing with whatever Blair said and wearing whatever brand Blair wore. I took my usual assigned seat at the far end of the table, right near the swinging kitchen door. The drafty spot where the serving staff constantly walked past. "Hello everyone," I said quietly, pulling out the heavy wooden chair. My father gave me a brief, dismissive nod over his reading glasses. "Sloan, you are wearing that worn-out gray sweater again." My mother sighed loudly, making sure everyone at the table heard her disappointment. "Honestly, Sloan, I sent you a very generous gift card to Nordstrom for Christmas specifically so you could update your wardrobe. Could you not have bought something a little more festive and presentable for a family dinner?" "It is fine, Mom." I am comfortable, I replied evenly, pouring myself a glass of tap water from the pitcher near my plate because the expensive wine bottle had not made its way down to my end of the table, and nobody offered to pass it. Suddenly, the heavy mahogany front door opened with a dramatic, echoing bang. Blair had arrived. She swept into the dining room a few moments later like a hurricane of designer labels and sheer entitlement. She was wearing a pristine white Prada winter coat, holding the keys to her brand-new Porsche Macan prominently in her hand so everyone could clearly see the golden crest on the leather keychain. "Sorry I am late, everyone," she announced loudly, air-kissing our mother and father on the cheeks. I was stuck on a terrible conference call with my private wealth manager. We are restructuring my personal assets, moving some heavy capital around for a massive new commercial real estate investment. It is exhausting being this in demand on a Sunday. "Oh, honey, you work far too hard," my mother cooed, immediately signaling the hired maid to pour Blair a large glass of the good Cabernet. "You need to take a vacation. You are going to burn yourself out building your empire." "I am actually flying to Dubai next month," Blair said smoothly, taking her seat right next to my father at the head of the table. "First class, of course. I need to network with some high-net-worth international clients." Kala gasped in genuine admiration, leaning forward. "Dubai. That is amazing, Blair. You are so incredibly successful. I just scrolled past your Instagram story with the new Porsche. The leather interior is gorgeous." I ate a dry piece of bread and quietly watched the performance. Blair did not just buy a car, she bought an audience. The dinner proceeded with the usual toxic dynamics. Blair entirely dominated the conversation with wild, exaggerated stories about her marketing campaigns, her high-end networking events, and her incredibly sophisticated investment strategies that sounded like they were copied directly from a finance podcast. I listened closely, chewing my food slowly, analyzing her words the way I analyzed wiretap transcripts. She was using a massive amount of corporate buzzwords, but saying very little of actual substance. It sounded exactly like the desperate fraudsters I interrogated in federal holding cells for a living. Then, right during the salad course, Uncle Gideon cleared his throat, setting his fork down. "Speaking of investments, Fawn, I meant to ask you about the family trust. The market has been highly volatile lately. Is everything secure and locked down?" The entire room went still for a fraction of a second. The family trust. It was set up by our wealthy grandparents decades ago. It was worth a total of $500,000, strictly designed to be split equally between Blair and me when we both turned 30. $250,000 each. The legal stipulation in the document was that any withdrawal required rigorous identity verification and wet signatures from both the specific beneficiary and the primary trustee, which was my father. I noticed my father look away from Gideon quickly. He suddenly found his organic salad extremely interesting, pushing a cherry tomato around his plate. "It is fine, Gideon. Everything is perfectly managed and secure," Vaughn said, his voice slightly tighter and higher-pitched than usual. Blair took a long, slow sip of her red wine, her eyes starting to our father, then locking directly onto me. A cruel smirk played at the corner of her perfectly painted lips. "Well, some of us know how to manage money much better than others," Kala chimed in, looking directly at my cheap sweater. "I mean, no offense, Sloan, but what would you even do with a massive trust fund? Put it in a low-yield savings account? Buy a slightly newer used Honda and save the rest for a rainy day?" Blair giggled, the sound sharp and mean, echoing in the dining room. "Exactly. Money needs to move, Kala. It needs to breathe. It needs to be leveraged by people who actually understand the game. If you just let it sit there, or if you hand it to someone who is terrified of their own shadow, it just rots away." I set my silver fork down on the table. The metal clinked against the porcelain plate, a sharp, defining sound in the quiet room. "I understand the financial game just fine, Blair," I said, keeping my voice entirely level and devoid of emotion. "I just choose not to play it with other people's money." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Blair's eyes narrowed into dangerous slits. "What is that supposed to mean?" "It means," I said, looking straight into her angry eyes, that real wealth does not need to be shouted from the rooftops. And it certainly does not need to be constantly validated by an audience at a dinner table. My mother slapped her hand flat on the table, making the glasses rattle. Sloane, that is incredibly rude and uncalled for. Your sister is sharing her hard-earned success with the family, and you are just acting bitter. You have always been jealous of her ambition and drive. I am not jealous, Mom. I am just observant. The tension was so thick you could choke on it. Uncle Gideon looked highly uncomfortable, shifting in his seat. Aunt Linnea aggressively drank her wine, looking anywhere but at me. Blair stared at me, her chest heaving slightly, the fake veneer of the sophisticated businesswoman cracking just a little to reveal the spoiled, angry child underneath. She leaned forward over the table, her voice dropping to a harsh, venomous whisper. You think you are so smart, sitting over there in your cheap clothes, judging me. You know nothing about how the real world works, Sloane. You know nothing about what it takes to actually build an empire from scratch. I held her furious gaze, my expression completely blank. You are right, Blair. I do not know how your empire is built, but I have a feeling I am about to find out. The main course of prime rib was cleared away by the staff in agonizing, suffocating silence. Nobody spoke. The maid brought out a massive, decadent chocolate tart, setting it carefully in the center of the table. My mother started pouring expensive dark roast coffee, desperately trying to steer the conversation back to safe, wealthy, suburban topics. Have you seen the new landscaping they are doing at the country club, Gideon? It is simply divine. They imported the stone from Italy, Blythe chattered nervously, her eyes darting around the table. But Blair was not done. She could not handle anyone, especially me, challenging her carefully crafted narrative of superiority. She picked up her crystal wine glass and tapped it forcefully with a heavy silver dessert spoon. Clink, clink, clink. The sharp, piercing sound demanded absolute attention from everyone in the room. Everyone turned to look at her. Blair stood up slowly, smoothing the front of her designer dress, making sure all eyes were on her. Actually, since we are talking about wealth and ambition tonight, I have an announcement to make. A confession, really. She looked directly down the length of the table at me, her eyes shining with a malicious, terrifying glee. I want to formally thank Sloane. The table murmured in deep confusion. Calla looked bewildered, her coffee cup frozen halfway to her mouth. I did not move a single muscle. I just sat there, my hands folded in my lap, and watched her. You see, Blair continued, pacing slowly behind her heavy oak chair like a predator circling its prey. A few months ago, a massive, once-in-a-lifetime investment opportunity came across my desk. A chance to buy into a premium commercial real estate venture downtown. Guaranteed, massive returns. But I needed liquid capital fast to secure my position. And unfortunately, my own assets were tied up in other aggressive portfolios that I could not liquidate in time. She stopped pacing and leaned both her hands heavily on the table, leaning forward to close the distance between us. So, I looked at our family trust. $500,000 sitting there. Half of it belonging to Sloane. Half of it just gathering dust, doing nothing, because my sister is too terrified to take a single risk in her sad, boring little life. She paused, letting the suspense build, enjoying the dramatic effect. So, I took it. I put the money to work. I invested Sloane half of the trust into my business ventures. The words hung heavily in the air. For a long moment, the only sound in the enormous dining room was the low hum of the luxury refrigerator in the kitchen. Uncle Gideon blinked rapidly, his face going pale with shock. You took her half of the trust? He asked, his voice trembling with disbelief. How did you withdraw it? I asked, my voice terrifyingly calm. I did not yell. I did not cry. I did not throw my glass at the wall. I just asked the mechanical, procedural question. The bank strictly requires my physical signature on the release forms. It requires my government-issued ID to be present. It requires a licensed notary to witness the signing. Blair threw her head back and laughed. It was a genuine, ugly, mocking sound that scraped against my eardrums. Oh, Sloane. You are so incredibly naive. I just borrowed your social security number. Dad had a copy of your old tax returns sitting in the filing cabinet in his study. I filled out the release forms, forged your signature, and had a friend at my office stamp it with a notary seal she bought online. It was incredibly easy. Your credit was actually flawless, by the way. The bank processed the wire transfer without asking a single question. You forged my signature, I repeated, ensuring every single word was clear, distinct, and audible in the quiet room. You stole my social security number. You fraudulently wired $250,000 out of a federally insured financial institution. My mother waved her hand dismissively, as if swatting away a pesky, annoying fly. Oh, stop using those dramatic, technical words, Sloan. She did not steal it. She borrowed it. She is your sister. Family helps family. She needed business capital urgently, and you work a safe government job. You do not need that kind of money right now. You live in a tiny apartment. What were you going to do with it anyway? Buy a fancier microwave? My father finally spoke up, looking slightly guilty but fiercely determined to defend his favorite child. Sloan, try to understand the bigger picture here. Blair was in a tight spot. If she missed this real estate investment, it would have ruined her career momentum. I knew about it. I approved the transfer on my end as the primary trustee. We were going to tell you, eventually, when the returns came in and we could give you a cut of the profits. We are family. We do not need to involve strict bank rules in our private family affairs. I looked from my mother to my father and finally to Blair. She was practically glowing with toxic triumph. She had committed a massive, undeniable felony, and our parents were aggressively defending her. They were actively helping her gaslight me into thinking being robbed of $250,000 was just a routine family duty. You aided and abetted identity theft, Dad. I stated, looking at the man who had refused to loan me $15,000 for college. Calla scoffed loudly, rolling her eyes. God, Sloan, you are such a massive drama queen. It is not identity theft when it is your own sister. She is going to pay you back with interest. You should be thanking her on your knees for managing your stagnant finances. Uncle Gideon looked absolutely horrified. Vaughn, this is highly illegal. You cannot just forge legal documents to drain a trust fund. That is serious fraud. Blair rolled her eyes at Gideon. Oh, relax, Uncle Gideon. Nobody got hurt. The money is making more money as we speak. It is what winners do. Winners take initiative while losers read the rulebook. She looked down the table at me, her smile turning incredibly cruel. So, what are you going to do about it, Sloan? Cry to Mom and Dad? Throw a tantrum? Go ahead. Call the local police. By the time they figure out the paperwork, the money will have already doubled, and I will write you a check to make you go away. I slowly folded my linen napkin and placed it neatly on the table next to my untouched dessert. You committed federal banking fraud, Blair. You stole $250,000. What are you going to do? She mocked, her voice rising in pitch, dripping with venom. Sue me? Take me to court? Mom laughed, a high, nervous, condescending sound. Oh, Blair, do not tease her. Sloan cannot even afford a lawyer on her salary. She would have to represent herself in court, and she would be laughed out of the building. Blair crossed her arms over her chest, supreme, untouchable confidence radiating from every pore of her body. Exactly. You have no money, Sloan. You have no power. You are a nobody working a nothing job. You are going to sit there, you are going to eat your dessert, and you are going to accept that I am the one who makes the decisions in this family. Because you cannot do a single thing to stop me. The heavy silence that followed Blair's declaration was not empty. It was thick, suffocating, and packed with the family expectation of my emotional breakdown. They were eagerly waiting for the tears. They were waiting for me to storm out of the house in a fit of helpless, pathetic rage, retreating to my cheap apartment to lick my wounds in the dark, just like I had done when I was 18. Just like I had done every single time they pushed me down to elevate Blair. But I did not cry. My heart was not racing. In fact, a strange, profound sense of absolute peace washed over my entire body. It was the kind of cold, hard peace that comes when you finally realize you have nothing left to lose, and therefore, nothing left to hold you back. I looked at Blair. She was breathing slightly heavily, her cheeks flushed, high on her own cruelty and perceived power. I looked at my parents, their faces set in stubborn defiance, ready to defend their golden child to the bitter end, regardless of the laws she broke. What none of them knew, what their arrogant minds could not possibly comprehend, was that I was not hearing this devastating information for the first time tonight. My mind flashed back to exactly 3 weeks ago. I was sitting at my steel desk at the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network headquarters in Washington, D.C. The massive room was humming with the sound of encrypted servers and the low, urgent conversations of federal agents tracking global syndicates. My boss, Deputy Director Cale, a hardened man who had spent 30 years dismantling drug cartels and massive white-collar crime syndicates, had walked over to my desk, his face grim. He dropped a bright red priority folder right on top of my keyboard. "Agent Sloan," he had said, his voice a gravelly whisper. "The automated federal surveillance grid flagged a massive anomaly this morning. A high-volume wire transfer. $250,000. The origin account matches your personal social security number. The destination account belongs to a Blair. Is this authorized by you?" I had opened the folder with trembling hands. There it was. The withdrawal slip from my family trust. The forged signature that looked incredibly close to mine, but lacked the slight leftward slant on the letter E that I always made. The fake notary stamp. The destination account was a high-risk offshore holding account that our department frequently monitored for corporate money laundering. I had stared at the paperwork, the sheer weight of the betrayal freezing the blood in my veins. "No, sir," I had replied, forcing my voice to remain remarkably steady. "This is unauthorized. This is a severe case of identity theft." Cale had looked at me with deep, paternal sympathy, but maintained a sharp professional edge. "It is your sister, Sloan. If we open a full federal case, it will destroy your family. Do you want to handle this privately?" I had looked at the forged signature again. I thought about the sheer, unadulterated arrogance it took to steal my identity and assume I would just take the abuse in silence. "No," I had told Cale, closing the folder. "Open the case. Run a full forensic audit on Blair finances. Treat her like any other criminal subject." For the past 3 weeks, I had lived an exhausting double life. By day, I worked side by side with elite forensic accountants, tracking every single cent Blair had stolen and spent. By night, I ignored her casual text messages asking about what color dress she should wear to a charity gala. I had methodically built a watertight, irrefutable federal case against my own sister. I came to this family dinner for one reason, and one reason only. In financial fraud cases, a direct, voluntary confession from the subject, recorded in front of multiple witnesses, takes a strong case and turns it into a guaranteed, inescapable conviction. I came here tonight to get her on the record. And now, here we were. The most ironic part of this entire nightmare, the part that almost made me laugh out loud right there at the dinner table, was the specific bank Blair had chosen to defraud. The family trust was held at First National Heritage, a bank that was currently under a massive, direct federal audit by my specific division due to severe compliance failures. We had total, backdoor access to their internal systems. Blair had not just stolen my money, she had proudly walked into a bank managed by federal agents and happily handed them a forged federal document with her own fingerprints all over it. "Earth to Sloan," Kala snapped sharply, waving a manicured hand right in front of my face, aggressively pulling me back to the present moment. "Are you in shock? Did your tiny brain just short-circuit? Do not worry, Blair will probably give you a small allowance if you behave yourself." I blinked slowly, bringing my focus back to the smug faces staring at me across the crystal and china. My mother looked entirely bored, sipping her coffee. My father looked impatient, checking his watch. Blair looked deeply victorious. I reached into my pocket and blindly pressed the button to turn off the silent recording app on my phone. The file was saved to a secure cloud. The confession was logged. The trap had not just sprung, it had snapped shut with enough force to crush bone. "I am not in shock, Kala," I said softly. The tone of my voice was entirely different now. It was no longer the quiet, deferential, apologetic tone of the family scapegoat. It was the cold, clinical, authoritative voice of Senior Special Agent Sloan. I turned my full attention back to Blair. "You said you invested the money in commercial real estate, Blair. Guaranteed returns." "Yes," she said, lifting her chin defiantly. "A massive development project in the city. You would not understand the complex logistics. It is highly confidential." I nodded slowly, resting my hands on the table. "Confidential. Right. Just like the confidential, desperate payments you made to American Express last Tuesday to cover $40,000 in delinquent credit card debt?" Blair's smile vanished instantly. It was as if someone had flipped a switch. The color drained completely from her face, leaving her looking slightly green under the glow of the crystal chandelier. "What?" she whispered, her voice cracking. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, interlacing my fingers. "And the $80,000 wire transfer you sent to the luxury dealership in Oak Brook to pay cash for that Porsche Macan currently sitting in the driveway. And let us not forget the $25,000 spent at the Burj Al Arab Hotel in Dubai. You know, for networking." The dining room went dead silent. The kind of silence that aggressively rings in your ears. My father dropped his heavy silver fork. It hit his plate with a loud clatter that made Aunt Linnea jump. "Sloan," he stammered, his eyes wide. "What are you talking about? Where are you getting those ridiculous numbers?" I ignored him entirely, keeping my eyes locked onto Blair, watching the sheer panic begin to furiously claw at the edges of her eyes. "Your empire is built on sand, Blair. You did not invest my trust fund. You used it to pay off the massive, crippling debts you accumulated trying to pretend you are richer than you actually are. You are broke. You are drowning. And you used my name to buy yourself a stolen lifeboat." The numbers I just recited were not lucky guesses. They were cold, hard facts, meticulously verified by the forensic accounting team at FinCEN. Over the last 3 weeks, Kale and I had dissected Blair's financial life with surgical, terrifying precision. She was a walking disaster of debt, lies, and sheer desperation. Her supposed boutique marketing firm was barely breaking even, losing clients every quarter. Her lavish lifestyle, the designer Prada coats, the luxury cars, the constant first-class travel to exotic locations, was funded entirely by a mountain of high-interest credit cards and predatory loans. When the aggressive creditors started calling her office, when the repo men started looking for her previous luxury SUV, she panicked. She saw the family trust sitting there, a fat, juicy, unprotected target, and she took it without a second thought. But it was not just the theft of the money that enraged me to my core. It was the devastating collateral damage she was willing to inflict on me to save herself. "Blair, how are the tax payments on the trust withdrawal coming along?" I asked, my voice dripping with a dangerous, icy calm that made Uncle Gideon shiver. Because according to the IRS tax code, taking a sudden lump sum disbursement of $250,000 triggers a massive capital gains tax event. An event permanently tied to the Social Security number on the withdrawal form. "Which is mine." Blair swallowed hard. The sound of her throat clicking echoed in the painfully quiet room. I have an accountant handling that. It is deferred." I filed an extension. "It is not deferred," I stated flatly, my voice cutting through her lies like a scalpel. "You missed the first estimated tax payment 2 weeks ago. And because you tied a massive, delinquent federal tax debt directly to my name, my credit score took a severe hit last Thursday. You did not just steal my money, Blair. You are actively destroying my financial identity, my future ability to buy a home, just to buy Prada coats and pretend you are important." Vaughn stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. His face was flushed a dark, angry red. "Now see here, Sloan. I will not have you making these wild, insane accusations in my house. You do not know anything about Blair's personal finances. You are just making up numbers you found on the internet to try and ruin her big moment because you are a bitter, jealous person." Mom nodded vigorously, her pearls shaking. "Exactly. Blair is a CEO of a successful company. You are a low-level clerk. You are probably just looking at some fake scam website. Apologize to your sister right now. I looked at my parents, realizing with absolute, heartbreaking clarity that they were entirely beyond saving. They would watch Blair burn my house down to the ground and then aggressively blame me for building it out of wood. I am not making anything up, Dad, I said, my voice rising just enough to effortlessly command the entire room. She is in severe default on 3 different premium credit cards. The Porsche outside is registered to a fake shell LLC that has 0 reported revenue. The commercial real estate investment she mentioned does not exist. It is a phantom company. The money is gone. She blew my entire future on maintaining her fake image. Blair slammed both her hands violently on the table, rattling the expensive silverware and knocking over a water glass. Shut up, she screamed, her perfect, composed facade shattering completely into a million pieces, revealing the terrified, cornered fraudster underneath. You do not know what you are talking about. You are just a pathetic, lonely loser who stalks people online. So what if I spent some of it? I am going to make it back. I always make it back. You just wait, I am closing a huge corporate deal next month. Uncle Gideon looked at Blair with sheer, unadulterated disgust. You stole her money to buy a car? Blair, how could you do something so evil? Aunt Linnea covered her mouth with trembling hands, looking back and forth between the two of us in horror. Calla, for the very first time in her miserable life, was entirely speechless, her mouth hanging open. Blair backed away from the table, breathing heavily, her chest heaving as she tried desperately to regain her composure. She ran a shaking hand through her blonde hair, forcing a sneer back onto her face. It was a desperate, incredibly ugly look. Fine. Believe whatever you want, you old fools, she spat. But it does not matter. The money is securely in my accounts. The paperwork is signed and filed. The bank approved it. What are you going to do about it, Sloane? She leaned back against the wall, crossing her arms, trying to project a power she no longer possessed. Call the police? The local cops will look at the trust documents and tell you it is a civil matter. A family dispute. You will have to sue me. And we all know you do not have the financial resources for a protracted legal battle. I will hire a team of ruthless lawyers and drag it out in court for years until you are completely bankrupt and begging me to stop. She smiled, a venomous, triumphant smile that showed all her teeth. You lose, Sloane. Just like you always do. Accept your place and get out of my house. I looked at her. I looked at the smug, arrogant satisfaction on her face, the unwavering belief that she had outsmarted the system, outsmarted the law, and outsmarted me. I felt the familiar, comforting weight of the federal badge resting in my pocket. The badge she thought belonged to a mall cop. You are right about one thing, Blair, I said softly, standing up from my chair and straightening my cheap gray blazer. The local police would probably call this a civil matter. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and set it down firmly on the table. But the United States Treasury Department does not handle civil matters. They handle federal crimes. I unlocked my phone. I opened my highly encrypted federal messaging app. The chat with Deputy Director Kale and the armed tactical team was active. They had been sitting in black SUVs 2 blocks away, standing by for my signal for the last hour. I looked Blair dead in the eyes, my finger hovering over the glowing screen. I am not going to sue you, Blair. I do not need to hire a lawyer. I pressed send. The message was simple and definitive. Initiate protocol. Confession secured. Move in. Blair frowned, deep confusion replacing the smugness on her face. What are you doing? Who are you texting? Calla leaned forward, trying to see my screen. Is she texting her imaginary friends to come save her? I put the phone face down on the table and looked around the room, making direct eye contact with everyone. The Museum of Pain was about to close permanently. I am texting the people who are going to arrest you, Blair. Thank you so much for following my story so far. If you are enjoying seeing a toxic family finally get what they deserve, please leave a comment to let me know, and don't forget to like and subscribe for the explosive conclusion. The dining room fell into a bizarre, suspended animation. Everyone was staring at me, trying to process what I had just said. Arrest you. The words hung in the warm, rosemary-scented air, feeling entirely alien in this setting of crystal glasses and expensive chocolate tarts. Kala was the first to break the silence. She let out a loud, obnoxious snort. "Oh my God, Sloane. You have officially lost your mind. Arrest her? What are you going to do? Call the mall security team? Are you going to write her a fake parking ticket?" My father's face darkened. He slammed his fist on the table. "Enough. Sloane, this behavior is entirely unacceptable. You come into my house, wearing those cheap clothes, eating my food, and you threaten your sister with some imaginary police force? You're acting like a lunatic. I demand that you apologize to Blair right now, or you can pack up your things and leave this house." I did not move. I did not flinch. I kept my eyes locked on Blair. She was trying to maintain her sneer, trying to project the image of the untouchable golden child, but I could see the tiny tremors in her hands. The deep-seated insecurity that drove her to steal my identity was bubbling to the surface. Title 18, United States Code, Section 1028, I said, my voice steady, echoing slightly in the large room. My mother blinked, her brow furrowing in confusion. "What on earth are you blabbering about now?" "Fraud and related activity in connection with identification documents," I continued, quoting the federal statute from memory. It was burned into my brain. The unauthorized use of a social security number belonging to another individual to obtain a thing of value. In this case, $250,000. Blair swallowed hard, her eyes darting toward the heavy mahogany front door, then back to me. "Shut up," she hissed. "You are just saying words to sound smart. You do not know anything about the law." Title 18, United States Code, Section 1344, I went on, my voice rising just a fraction, drowning out her protests. "Bank fraud. Whoever knowingly executes a scheme to defraud a financial institution or to obtain any of the monies, funds, credits, assets, securities, or other property owned by or under the custody or control of a financial institution, by means of false or fraudulent pretenses, representations, or promises." Uncle Gideon was staring at me, his jaw slightly slack. He looked from me to Blair, his expression shifting from confusion to creeping horror. "Sloane," he whispered. "How do you know all this?" "I know it, Uncle Gideon, because I deal with arrogant thieves every single day of my life," I replied, never breaking eye contact with my sister. "I know it because I watch people just like Blair cry in interrogation rooms when they realize their fake empires cannot protect them from federal sentencing guidelines." My father stood up again, his face a mask of pure fury. "I said that is enough. Stop using those ridiculous legal terms to scare your sister. You work in a basement filing papers. You are not a lawyer. You are not a cop. You are just a bitter, resentful woman who cannot handle the fact that her younger sister is a massive success." "Is she a success, Dad?" I asked, tilting my head. "Is she a success when she is forging your signature as the trustee?" "Because the forensic accounting team found this second set of documents, Dad. The ones where she forged your authorization to release the funds." Vaughn froze. The color drained from his face so fast he looked ill. "What?" he choked out. Blair scrambled backward, her chair screeching violently against the floor. "She is lying. Dad, she is lying, I swear. I did not forge your name. I used the stamp, but you said I could. You said I could use the money." "I never gave you permission to forge my signature on federal banking documents, Blair," Vaughn said, his voice suddenly weak, realizing the massive legal jeopardy his favorite child had just placed him in. "Oh, it gets better," I said, taking a step away from my chair. "She did not just forge your signature, Dad. She used Uncle Gideon's home address as the secondary mailing location for the offshore holding account to bypass the bank fraud detection algorithm." Gideon shot up from his chair. He looked like he was going to be sick. "You used my house? My address? Blair, what is wrong with you?" My mother was hyperventilating now, clutching her pearl necklace. "Sloane, stop this. Stop this right now. You are ruining family dinner. You are ruining everything." "I am not ruining anything, Mom," I said coldly. Blair ruined it the moment she decided my future was hers to steal. The moment she decided that playing pretend on Instagram was more important than my life. I am just the person holding up the mirror. Blair lunged forward, her face twisted in ugly, desperate rage. She grabbed her wine glass and hurled it at me. I stepped to the side, and the heavy crystal shattered violently against the expensive floral wallpaper behind me, raining red wine and glass shards onto the hardwood floor. "You psycho!" Blair screamed, tears of sheer panic finally spilling down her perfectly contoured cheeks. "You set me up. You came here to set me up." "I did not set you up, Blair. You stole my identity. You committed the crime. I just brought the receipts." My phone buzzed on the table. A single, short vibration. I did not need to look at the screen to know what it said. The tactical team was in position. The perimeter was secured. The moment of reckoning had officially arrived. I looked around the room, taking in the sight of my shattered family. This moment was something I had waited for my entire life. "Are you ready?" "Do not take your eyes off the screen." The loud crash of the shattering wine glass seemed to act as a bizarre catalyst in the room. Kala let out a high-pitched shriek. Aunt Linnea pressed her hands firmly against her ears. My father stared at the red stain dripping down his expensive wallpaper, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Blair stood by the table, chest heaving, her hands shaking violently. She looked like a cornered animal realizing the trap had no escape. "I am going to sue you for defamation, Sloane," she stammered, her voice lacking all of its previous arrogant confidence. "I am going to take everything you have." "You cannot take what you already stole, Blair," I replied, my voice steady. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was a steady, continuous vibration. I reached down and flipped it over. The screen illuminated the dark mahogany table. It was a message from Deputy Director Kale. "Perimeter secure. Tactical units moving to the front entrance." We heard the glass break. "Are you secure, Agent?" I picked up the phone and typed a quick, single-handed reply. "I am secure. Move in." I slipped the phone back into my pocket and took a deep breath. The air felt charged, heavy with static electricity. I looked at Blair, who was frantically wiping her tears, trying to assemble the broken pieces of her fake persona. "You have the right to remain silent," I said, my voice cutting through the chaotic murmurs of the room. The dining room went dead silent again. Even Kala stopped whimpering. "What did you just say?" My mother whispered, her face pale. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law," I continued, stepping slowly toward the center of the room. My posture shifted. The slumped, defeated shoulders of the family scapegoat vanished, replaced by the rigid, disciplined stance of a trained federal agent. "Sloane, stop this ridiculous charade right now," my father demanded, though his voice shook. "You are embarrassing yourself. You are not a police officer." "You have the right to an attorney," I said, ignoring him entirely, keeping my eyes fixed directly on Blair. "If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed for you by the federal court." "I do not need a lawyer," Blair shrieked, backing away until she hit the edge of the antique china cabinet. "You cannot arrest me. You are a clerk. You make coffee for government bureaucrats." I reached inside the inner pocket of my cheap gray blazer. My fingers wrapped around the familiar leather folio. I pulled it out and flipped it open with a sharp snap of my wrist. The heavy, silver star of the United States Treasury Department caught the light of the crystal chandelier, gleaming with cold, undeniable authority. Next to it was my official federal identification card, bearing my photo and my actual title. I held the badge out, making sure every single person in the room could see it clearly. "I am Senior Special Agent Sloane," I announced, my voice carrying the weight of the entire federal government. "Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, United States Treasury Department." "And Blair, you just confessed to multiple Class D federal felonies in front of 6 civilian witnesses and a sworn federal agent." The reaction was instantaneous and profoundly satisfying. My mother let out a strangled gasp, her hands flying to her chest as she stumbled backward, catching herself on the back of her chair. Her eyes were wide, staring at the silver star as if it were a venomous snake. My father's face went entirely slack. The arrogant, dismissive patriarch was gone, replaced by an old man realizing he had severely misjudged his own flesh and blood for 3 decades. "Special agent?" he whispered, the words barely making it past his lips. "But the paperwork, the filing. I investigate complex financial syndicates, Dad," I said, turning my gaze to him for a brief second. "Money laundering, wire fraud, identity theft rings. My department oversees the security of the national banking grid. Did you really think the government would hand that kind of responsibility to someone who just files papers?" Kala looked like she was going to faint. She grabbed the edge of the table, her knuckles turning white. "Oh my God," she muttered over and over. "Oh my God." Uncle Gideon stepped forward, his eyes fixed on my badge. "You have been a federal agent this whole time? All these years?" "7 years, Uncle Gideon," I replied softly. I needed a low profile. High wealth, flashy lifestyles, those things compromise undercover financial investigations. It was safer for my career if you all thought I was a nobody. And frankly, it was easier to let you believe what you wanted to believe. I turned back to Blair. She looked like all the blood had been drained from her body. The Prada coat suddenly looked entirely absurd on her, like a child wearing an oversized costume. "You cannot do this," she whispered, tears streaming down her face, ruining her expensive makeup. "I am your sister. You are supposed to protect me. You surrendered the right to be my sister the moment you forged my name to steal $250,000, Blair. You targeted me because you thought I was weak. You thought I was poor, stupid, and incapable of fighting back. You assumed I would just lay down and take the abuse because that is what I have always done." I took one step closer to her. She flinched, shrinking back against the glass cabinet. "You assumed wrong," I said, my voice cold as ice. Outside, the quiet suburban street was suddenly bathed in chaotic, strobing lights. Red and blue flashes painted the living room windows. The heavy, undeniable sound of heavy tires screeching to a halt on the cobblestone driveway echoed through the house. Doors slammed. Multiple doors. Heavy footsteps pounded rapidly up the front steps. My mother started to cry, a high, panicked wailing sound. "Vaughn, do something. Tell them to go away." "Nobody is going anywhere, Mom," I said, putting my badge back into my pocket. "The audit is officially open." The front door did not just open, it was thrust open with authoritative force. The heavy mahogany banged against the entryway wall. A team of 4 armed FBI agents, wearing tactical vests emblazoned with bright yellow lettering, swarmed into the grand foyer. The sheer physical presence of federal law enforcement in my parents' meticulously decorated home was a jarring, violent contrast. It was the exact moment their pristine suburban illusion shattered into a million unfixable pieces. Following right behind the tactical team was Deputy Director Kale. He stepped into the dining room, his sharp, observant eyes scanning the chaotic scene. He took in the shattered wine glass, the terrified family members, and finally, Blair, who was practically hyperventilating against the china cabinet. Kale adjusted his suit jacket and looked directly at me. "Agent Sloan. Status?" "Target is secured, Director," I replied smoothly, slipping perfectly into my professional role. "I have a full, voluntary verbal confession to wire fraud and identity theft, witnessed by all 6 individuals in this room. The subject explicitly admitted to forging the trust withdrawal documents and utilizing my social security number to obtain $250,000. Kale nodded once, a gesture of absolute professional respect that hit my family like a physical blow. They had spent my entire life treating me like an incompetent burden, and here was a senior federal official treating me as a highly valued equal. "Excellent work, Sloan," Kale said, his voice deep and commanding. "The forensic team verified the bank surveillance footage from First National Heritage an hour ago. We have her on camera handing the forged documents to the teller. The case is ironclad." He turned his intense gaze toward Blair. "Blair, you are under arrest for multiple counts of federal wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and bank fraud." Blair let out a guttural, terrifying scream. "No, you cannot do this. Dad, help me." Dad, tell them to stop. Two FBI agents stepped forward, their faces entirely devoid of emotion. They grabbed Blair by the arms, spinning her around forcefully and pushing her face first against the antique china cabinet. The fine crystal inside rattled violently as they pulled her arms behind her back. The sharp, metallic click of the steel handcuffs locking around her wrists echoed loudly in the dining room. My mother collapsed onto the floor, sobbing hysterically, burying her face in her hands. My baby. She is my baby. Sloan, how could you do this to your own sister? You are a monster. I am a federal agent doing my job, Mom, I said, looking down at her without a single ounce of pity. She stole $250,000. What did you expect me to do? Give her a congratulatory hug? My father stepped forward, holding his hands up defensively toward Cale. Listen to me, sir. Officer. This is a massive misunderstanding. I am the primary trustee. I can authorize this. I will sign whatever you need me to sign right now to make this go away. We will pay the money back tomorrow morning. Cale looked at my father with deep disgust. It does not work like that, sir. This is not an overdue library book. Your daughter defrauded a federally insured bank and stole the identity of a federal agent. The moment the wire transfer cleared, it became a federal crime. You cannot unring this bell. And if you attempt to falsify documents now to cover for her, I will have my agents put you in handcuffs for obstruction of justice and conspiracy. Do you understand me? Vaughn shrank back, all the fight draining out of his body. He looked old, frail, and entirely broken. He nodded slowly, backing away. As the agents patted Blair down, checking the pockets of her Prada coat, one of them pulled out her designer leather wallet. He opened it to inventory the contents before transport. Agent Sloan, Director Cale, the agent called out, his voice sharp. You need to see this. Cale walked over, pulling on a pair of blue latex gloves. He took the wallet and began pulling out a thick stack of premium credit cards. He laid them out on the dining table, right next to the ruined chocolate tart. I stepped closer to examine them. My blood ran cold, then boiled with a fresh wave of rage. There were 6 credit cards. 2 of them were black cards. But none of them had Blair name on them. The first 2 were in the name of Vaughn. The next 2 were in the name of Blythe. And the last 2, the ones with the highest available credit limits, were clearly printed with the name Gideon. Uncle Gideon pushed past my father, his eyes wide with disbelief. He stared at the plastic cards resting on the table. Those are my names. That is my name. But I never applied for those cards. I use a credit union. I looked at Blair, who was sobbing wildly, her face smeared with expensive mascara. You did not just steal from me, I said, the magnitude of her sickness finally coming into full focus. You stole from everyone. You are a serial identity thief. Blair thrashed against the agents holding her. I was going to pay it all back. She screamed, her voice hoarse and desperate. I just needed time. The business was going to take off. You do not understand the pressure I am under to maintain my image. Image? Gideon yelled, his quiet demeanor vanishing entirely, replaced by raw, visceral anger. You stole my credit to buy your fake image? I trusted you. I built my credit for 40 years, and you stole it to buy purses and car leases? Cale signaled the agents. Get her out of here. Transport her to the federal holding facility downtown. No bail recommended. She is a flight risk with access to fraudulent funds. The agents hauled Blair toward the front door. She dragged her feet, screaming my name, screaming for our parents, screaming about how I had ruined her perfect life. Her cries echoed out into the quiet suburban street, where all the wealthy neighbors were now standing on their pristine lawns, watching the golden child of the neighborhood being stuffed into the back of an armored federal vehicle. Cale turned to my family. They were all staring at the table, looking at the credit cards that proved their favorite daughter was a financial parasite. My team will be in touch tomorrow morning, Cale said coldly. We are seizing this property as a potential crime scene. We will be running full forensic audits on every single person in this room to determine the full extent of the financial damage. If any of you attempt to hide assets, transfer money, or contact the subject, you will be arrested. Have a good evening. He nodded to me, turned, and walked out the front door, the heavy wood closing behind him with a definitive thud. I stood in the dining room, looking at the wreckage. My mother was still crying on the floor. My father was staring blankly at the wall. Uncle Gideon was making a panicked phone call to his bank. I walked over to the closet, grabbed my cheap gray coat, and put it on. I walked toward the front door. Sloan, my father croaked, his voice cracking. Where are you going? I paused with my hand on the brass doorknob. I am going home, Dad, I said, not looking back. I have work to do in the morning. The next morning, the FinCEN office in downtown Washington was a hive of aggressive, focused activity. I sat at my desk, a large cup of black coffee in my hand, watching the forensic accounting team dismantle Blair Life piece by piece. The digital monitors across the room displayed sprawling financial webs, tracking every stolen dollar, every forged signature, and every fraudulent wire transfer. My phone had been ringing continuously since 6 in the morning. My father, my mother, Aunt Linnea. I let every single call go straight to voicemail. I had nothing left to say to them. The time for talking had ended when they laughed at the thought of me not being able to afford a lawyer. Now, the federal government was doing the talking for me. At 10 o'clock, Director Kale called me into his glass-walled office. The table was covered in thick, heavily redacted financial dossiers. He motioned for me to sit down. Agent Sloan, he began, rubbing his tired eyes. We spent the entire night running the deep dive audit on your sister accounts, as well as cross-referencing the social security numbers of your parents and your uncle. How bad is it? I asked, keeping my voice purely professional. Kale sighed, opening the top folder. It is worse than we initially projected. The $250,000 from your trust fund was just the tip of the iceberg. Your sister has been running a highly sophisticated, localized identity theft ring for almost 3 years. He slid a spreadsheet across the desk toward me. I looked down at the numbers. The sheer magnitude of the theft made my stomach churn. Total estimated damages, Kale said quietly, are hovering around $400,000. $400,000? I repeated, staring at the bolded number at the bottom of the page. Where did the rest of it come from? Kale pointed a pen at the middle section of the spreadsheet. She maxed out those premium credit cards in your uncle's name, accumulating over $60,000 in high-interest debt. But the most devastating hit was your parents. I looked up at him, my brow furrowed. My parents? Yes. She somehow gained access to your father's primary retirement account credentials. Over the last 18 months, she has been siphoning off small, seemingly innocuous amounts of money, claiming them as hardship withdrawals and routing them through a shell company she set up in Delaware. She drained almost $90,000 from their retirement savings to fund her fake marketing firm and pay off her luxury car leases. I sat back in my chair, the air leaving my lungs. My parents. The people who had fiercely defended her, the people who had mocked my cheap clothes and praised her supposed business genius, had been actively funding her fraudulent lifestyle with their own retirement security. They had been robbed blind by their own golden child, and they never even noticed because they were too busy admiring the shiny, fake crown she wore. She wiped them out, I whispered. Essentially, yes, Kale confirmed. The IRS is also going to hit them with massive early withdrawal penalties because the paperwork she filed was entirely fraudulent. Your parents are looking at severe financial devastation. We froze all of Blair's assets this morning, but honestly, Sloan, there is almost nothing left to seize. The bank accounts are empty. The luxury cars are leased or heavily leveraged. She spent every single dime trying to look rich on the internet. A heavy, complicated emotion washed over me. It was not joy. It was not triumph. It was a profound, tragic sadness. My parents had built their entire worldview around the idea that wealth and status equaled moral superiority. They had sacrificed my emotional well-being to worship Blair's fake success. And now, the altar they prayed at had burned down, taking their entire future with it. My desk phone buzzed. I reached over and hit the speaker button. Sloan, it was the receptionist at the front desk. There is a man on line 3 for you. He says he is the attorney representing Blair. And Orson Vance. Put him through, I said, looking at Cale. Cale nodded, crossing his arms to listen. The line clicked. Agent Sloan? A smooth, polished voice said. This is Orson Vance. I have been retained to represent your sister, Blair, in this unfortunate family misunderstanding. I leaned forward toward the speakerphone. Let us get one thing straight immediately, Mr. Vance. This is not a family misunderstanding. This is a massive federal fraud investigation. Your client committed multiple felonies. Now, let us not rush to extreme language, Orson said, his tone dripping with patronizing calm. I understand emotions are running high. But surely, we can resolve this without tearing a family apart. My client is willing to offer a full civil settlement. She will sign a promissory note to repay the trust fund amount over the next 10 years, provided you drop the federal charges and close the investigation. We want to keep this out of the courts. I let out a short, humorless laugh. Drop the charges? Mr. Vance, do you understand who you are speaking to? I am not a civilian filing a small claims dispute. I am a federal agent. I do not have the authority, nor the desire, to drop federal indictments. The United States government is charging her, not me. She is your sister, Sloan, Orson pushed, his voice losing a bit of its polish. If you testify against her, you will send her to prison. Her life will be completely ruined. She ruined her own life, I replied coldly. And she tried to ruin mine. She also ruined my parents' retirement and my uncle's credit score. So do not try to play the family loyalty card with me. It is maxed out and declined. I looked at Cale. He gave me a small, approving smile. We have recorded confessions, Mr. Vance, I continued, my voice hardening into steel. We have bank surveillance footage. We have the forged documents with her fingerprints. We have the IP addresses she used to siphon $90,000 from our parents' retirement accounts. Your client is drowning in evidence. I highly suggest you stop trying to negotiate a fake settlement and start preparing her for a very long federal sentencing hearing. I reached out and pressed the button, cutting the line dead. The silence in the office was thick and satisfying. Cale closed the financial dossier and tapped it on the desk. Arraignment is tomorrow morning. Given the flight risk and the sheer volume of the fraud, the federal prosecutor is going to ask the judge to deny bail. She is going to sit in a federal holding cell until the trial. I looked out the window of the office, looking at the bustling streets of Washington, D.C. For the first time in 31 years, the heavy, suffocating weight of my family expectations was gone. I was no longer the scapegoat. I was the architect of my own justice. The arraignment was a brutal, efficient display of the federal justice system. I sat in the back row of the massive, wood-paneled federal courtroom, wearing my cheap gray suit, entirely blending into the shadows. The room was cold, smelling of floor wax and old paper. My parents sat in the front row, directly behind the defense table. They looked like ghosts. They had aged 10 years in a single weekend. My mother wept silently into a tissue. My father stared straight ahead, his posture broken, his expensive suit looking wrinkled and poorly fitted. Uncle Gideon was not there. He had refused to attend, stating he was busy filing massive fraud reports with the 3 major credit bureaus to try and save his own financial life. The heavy oak door on the side of the courtroom opened, and a U.S. Marshal escorted Blair into the room. The sight of her caused a ripple of shock through the gallery. The golden child, the sophisticated CEO of her fake marketing firm, was gone. She was wearing a standard-issue, oversized orange jumpsuit. Her wrists were shackled together with heavy steel chains that clinked loudly against her waist with every step. Her perfect blonde hair was unwashed and tangled. Her designer makeup was gone, revealing dark, exhausted circles under her terrified eyes. She looked up, frantically scanning the room. Her eyes locked onto our parents, and she let out a pathetic, desperate sob. Then, her eyes found me in the back row. For a split second, the sheer terror in her eyes was replaced by a flash of deeply ingrained hatred, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the crushing reality of her situation. The federal judge, a stern woman with zero tolerance for white-collar criminals, took the bench. The prosecutor laid out the charges. 14 counts of wire fraud. 6 counts of aggravated identity theft, 3 counts of bank fraud. Total estimated financial damage exceeding $400,000. Orson Vance, her expensive defense attorney, stood up and attempted to argue for bail, claiming she was a respected business owner with strong community ties. The judge cut him off immediately. Mr. Vance, your client used her supposed business as a shell to systematically drain the retirement accounts of her own parents and steal the trust fund of a federal agent. She has demonstrated highly sophisticated deceptive capabilities and zero moral restraint. She is a danger to the financial community and a severe flight risk. Bail is denied. The defendant will be remanded to federal custody pending trial. Blair collapsed into her chair, burying her face in her chained hands, sobbing violently. The sound echoed in the high-ceilinged courtroom. After the hearing concluded, the marshals led Blair away. I stood up and walked out into the wide marble hallway. I was heading toward the elevator when I heard my name called. Sloane. Wait. I stopped and turned around. My father, Vaughn, was walking toward me. His steps were slow and heavy. My mother was trailing slightly behind him, leaning on his arm for support. They looked entirely shattered. I waited, my face a neutral mask. Vaughn stopped a few feet away from me. He looked at my cheap suit, then up at my face. He looked incredibly small. Sloane, is it true? What the prosecutor said in there? Did she really take our retirement money? I nodded slowly. Yes, Dad. She set up a shell LLC and transferred small increments out of your primary portfolio over the last 18 months. Almost $90,000. She used it to pay the lease on the Porsche and cover her credit card minimums. My mother let out a small, wounded sound, covering her mouth with her hand. But why? We gave her everything. We paid for her wedding. We supported her business. Why would she steal from us? Because you taught her that looking wealthy was the only thing that mattered, Mom, I said quietly, the truth finally coming out into the harsh fluorescent light of the courthouse hallway. You praised her for being ruthless. You cheered when she stepped on other people to get ahead. You just never thought she would eventually step on you. My father's eyes filled with tears, a sight I had never seen in my entire life. The patriarch, the man who had denied my student loan and mocked my career, was weeping in a public hallway. We are ruined, Sloane. The IRS is penalizing us. The savings are gone. We might have to sell the house in Evanston just to cover the tax debt she created. I felt a brief, fleeting moment of pity, but it was quickly swallowed by the decades of emotional neglect they had put me through. I am sorry you lost your money, Dad, I said, keeping my voice perfectly even. But you enabled this behavior. You allowed her to believe she was above the law, above consequences, and above me. I tried to tell you at dinner. You chose to defend the criminal instead of the victim. Sloane, please, my mother begged, reaching out a trembling hand toward me. You know people in the department. You are a senior agent. Can you talk to the judge? Can you get them to reduce the charges? She is your sister. She is not built for prison. She will not survive in there. I looked at the woman who had laughed when Blair said I could not afford a lawyer. I looked at the woman who had called my career a joke. I cannot interfere with a federal prosecution, Mom. It is highly illegal and wildly unethical, I replied smoothly. And even if I could, I absolutely would not. My father recoiled as if I had slapped him. You would just let her rot in a cell? Your own flesh and blood? She made her choices, Dad, I said, turning away toward the elevator doors. And now she gets to live with the consequences. Just like you do. I pressed the call button. The metal doors slid open. I stepped inside the empty car and turned around to face them one last time. If you need a lawyer to help with the IRS penalties, I suggest you find a cheap one, I said, the irony thick on my tongue. Because I have a feeling you cannot afford the expensive ones anymore. The elevator doors slid shut, cutting off their horrified faces. As the car descended to the ground floor, I let out a long, slow breath. The invisible child was finally, permanently free. The trial never happened. Faced with the overwhelming, crushing mountain of forensic evidence, the surveillance videos, the forged signatures, the recorded confession at the dinner table, and the digital paper trail of the stolen retirement funds. Blair's expensive defense attorney realized they had absolutely no chance in front of a jury. 2 months after her arrest, Blair took a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to 2 counts of aggravated identity theft and 1 count of massive wire fraud, hoping for leniency. She did not get it. The sentencing hearing took place on a cold, rainy morning in February. The courtroom was almost empty, a stark contrast to the massive audiences Blair used to cultivate for her fake social media life. My parents were there, looking even worse than before. They had indeed been forced to list the massive estate in Evanston for sale. The IRS had placed heavy liens on their remaining assets to recover the massive tax penalties Blair had triggered. Uncle Gideon sat on the opposite side of the courtroom, refusing to even look in their direction. I sat in the back row, wearing a new, sharp black suit that I had bought with my own hard-earned money. I did not need to hide behind the cheap, gray clearance rack blazers anymore. My cover was blown, but my career was thriving. Director Kale had submitted my name for a massive commendation regarding the flawless execution and documentation of the fraud case. Blair stood before the judge, still wearing the orange jumpsuit, looking completely hollowed out. The arrogance that had defined her entire existence was entirely eradicated. "Blair," the judge said, his voice echoing with finality, "you orchestrated a calculated, predatory scheme against the people who trusted you the most. You stole the financial future of your own sister, ruined the credit of your uncle, and decimated the retirement savings of your parents to fund a shallow, fraudulent lifestyle. Your actions show a terrifying lack of empathy and a profound level of narcissism." The judge adjusted his glasses, looking down at the sentencing guidelines. "This court sentences you to 7 years in a federal penitentiary, to be followed by 5 years of highly supervised probation. You are further ordered to pay full restitution to all victims, though the court acknowledges that the assets have largely been squandered." 7 years. Blair's legs gave out. She collapsed against the defense table, letting out a gut-wrenching wail of pure despair. The marshals had to physically lift her up by her arms to drag her out of the courtroom. She looked back over her shoulder, her eyes wild, searching for our parents. "Dad. Mom. Please." But my father just sat there, staring blankly at the floor. My mother covered her ears, weeping quietly. They had nothing left to give her. No money, no power, no protection. I stood up slowly and walked out of the courtroom. The heavy wooden doors closed behind me, shutting out the sounds of my shattered family. I walked out of the federal courthouse and into the freezing rain of Washington, D.C. I pulled my collar up against the wind, feeling a strange, profound sense of quiet in my mind. For 31 years, I had carried the heavy, toxic burden of being the family disappointment. I had let them define my worth. I had let them treat me like a stepping stone so Blair could pretend she was a queen. But I was the one walking free in the rain today. I was the one with a clean conscience, a thriving career, and a secure future. I had not sought out revenge. I had simply stopped protecting them from the consequences of their own toxic actions. I let the truth do the heavy lifting. The aftermath was exactly as brutal as I expected. My parents sold the house and moved into a small, cramped condo in a lower middle-class suburb. They stopped calling me. I stopped reaching out. The bridge was not just burned, it was vaporized. Uncle Gideon spent months fighting with the credit bureaus, finally clearing his name, but the stress took a heavy toll on his health. And Blair was sitting in a concrete cell, trading her Prada coats for a standard-issue uniform, learning what it really meant to have no power. Some people, the extended relatives who only heard rumors, whispered that I was ruthless. They said that I was a cold, calculating monster for sending my own sister to federal prison and letting my parents go bankrupt. They said that family should always forgive family, no matter what. But as I unlocked my car and sat in the quiet warmth of the cabin, looking at the federal badge resting securely in my bag, I knew the truth. Forgiveness is for mistakes. Identity theft, forgery, and financial ruin are not mistakes. They are choices. And every choice demands a payment. When I looked back at that final moment in the courthouse, Watching my parents cry over the daughter who robbed them blind, and the daughter who was being dragged away in chains, I felt absolutely nothing. I turned my back and walked away from the wreckage without a single word. Some people call me cold. Some people say I should have given her a chance to explain, a chance to make it right, simply because we share the same blood. So, I leave it up to you, the jury of the internet. When your own flesh and blood steals your identity, mocks your poverty, and ruins the lives of everyone around them just to look good on social media, where do you draw the line? Was I wrong for letting the federal trap snap shut, or did I do exactly what needed to be done? Let me know in the comments below. I would love to read your perspective. Thank you so much for watching and listening to my story on this channel. If you found this tale of instant karma satisfying, and if you believe that toxic family members need to face the music, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss another crazy Reddit story. See you in the next one.